Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are. Hosted by Desiree Duffy.
Welcome one and all to Books That Make You. I'm your host, Desiree Duffy, and today we're talking about books that make you see into your future, knowing our path, getting insights into the future, and finding truth. This is what we turn to religion for, isn't it? You know, what has always struck me as coincidental is how all the major religions seem to have similarities, and they all have a certain degree of mysticism or prophecy involved. They certainly have deeper connections, I think, which we sometimes seem to forget about in our modern day era. Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, the ancient Kabbala. Are these connected? What do you think? And what about the tarot deck and seeing into the future? Does that have significance? Can we pull from mystical practices associated with the tarot and the Kabbala in some kind of an effort to find revelations, personal insights, personal growth? Let's find out during today's show. Our guest has a book that specifically integrates the tarot and Kabbalistic traditions in counting the Omer. This practice helps with meditation, and that can help people in their life's personal journey. It is called Tarot and the Gates of Light. Its author is Horne, and he's studied Kabbalah with academic, religious, and practical teachers, and he's also studied tarot with many of today's leading teachers in that area. And his writing has appeared in the Washington Post. He's been published in the Los Angeles Times, Metro Source, a teacher of Kabbalistic tarot. He lives in New York City. And hello, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
This is so fascinating to me. And I'm just, we love seeing our future or knowing what's going to happen or getting insights. What is it that drives us as humans to seek that in so many different ways?
All of us are afraid of the unknown, actually. I think that's really at the heart of so many divination techniques, is that people really are insecure with what the possibilities might be. And so they seek guidance, and we all seek guidance in lots of ways. Divination, of course, the very word itself has the word divine within it, and divine refers both to a deity, to the God, but it also refers to the desire to connect with that deity and learn from it. And the hope here is in divination is that when we connect with the divine source, we have a better understanding of our life's path.
Some religions or some people I've heard over the years say that it's not right, or it's not something that God or a higher power, etc., wants us to do, that we shouldn't want to know our futures. What do you have to say to that?
Well, it depends on, who you're talking to. Everybody has a different view of what the teachings are. Certainly, in the Hebrew Bible, you'll see conflicting messages, because at one point it will say you should not do this sort of thing. And at a whole other point, you'll see that there are teachings about the Urim and the Thummim. These are the sacred divination tools that were used by the high priest in the temple. So clearly, even within the temple itself, this was a practice.
And it does seem that oftentimes it's certain people, certain hierarchies, people that are higher up have this right or privilege. And it's almost a way that some people, some religions, some philosophies can control others, don't you think?
Well, I certainly think that, one of the issues with hierarchy and organized religion can be a control factor. And one of the things that I really love about tarot is that it really helps you find your own path and to become a spiritually responsible adult on your own. That doesn't mean you walk away from a path or a tradition, but it means that you learn how to contact those teachings and live them from your core and from your understanding of what the divine wants for you, rather than listening to someone who you may not entirely believe really is in contact with those higher forces.
And that's what I love about your book and the way it's presented. And I do want to dig more into that because you make it accessible. You make this for anybody, everybody to be able to use. But first, could you just describe and explain to us a little bit, especially for the layperson, what is the tarot? What is this deck of cards? Explain where it came from and the history just a bit.
All right. Well, tarot first appeared in Europe in the 14th, 15th century in Italy. Some people say it came from Turkey or via the Silk Road from China. But it was adapted in Italy, and it was a card game, really, at first. And it was put together by the people of that time to reflect the images that they knew and that they lived with. So you have the major arcana, and they represent virtues and powers that people were familiar with. So you'll see something like the emperor or the empress or the magician. And these are all things that were part of their lives. And there were things that they believed in, for example, like the devil. But there were also a whole other set within the tarot called the minor arcana, and these were images of daily life and people, how they lived their daily life. And the interesting thing is there are 22 major arcana cards, and they correspond, interestingly enough, to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And somebody saw that connection and started to bring these systems, the system of tarot and the system of Kabbala, which is Jewish mysticism, together, so that what started out as a game actually became a study tool for learning the principles of Kabbalistic mysticism.
That is so fascinating how that connection came to be. I mean, even if you look at the tarot cards and the major arcana and just the different suits, that's where our modern day playing cards come from. You can see the correlation. So when people looked at the fact that this corresponded with the Hebrew alphabet, was that just a coincidence, or was there something there? Was the tarot, when it was created, was it inspired by that, or is it just something that, I don't know, like there was just a connection there because what is truth is truth?
I don't think any of us really know. There are people who have been studying this for centuries now, and no one has found the smoking gun of connection. Everyone has been looking. The closest anybody has come to finding how these two things connected is that a scholar actually in the last 30 years was reading the very first book written down of tarot divination meanings, an explanation of what the cards actually meant. And he recognized some of the phrases that were describing the meanings of the cards, that they came from a very famous Kabbalistic text called Gates of Light, which describes the energies of the Sephirot. There are 10 Sephirot, and these are sort of the building blocks that the divine used for creation. And when this scholar looked at the book that was written down in the 18th century of the tarot meanings, and he looked at Gates of Light, he could see whole phrases that were taken from Gates of Light and used in the book to explain the meanings of the tarot. Now, we don't know whether the person who wrote this book of meanings of the tarot knew Gates of Light. He said he learned it from a traveling mystic who had come from Italy. And the cards had come from Italy, and the book Gates of Light, when it was translated, was published in Italy. So it's entirely possible that the man who wrote all of this down learned it from someone else without ever really knowing the origin.
That's a fascinating study. And yeah, you have to imagine that somehow, somewhere, there was that connection. Tell us a little bit, because you've studied both Kabbalah and the tarot. So how did you come to this conclusion and to this path, your own path, in writing this book? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, sure. Well, I started reading and studying tarot when I was 16 years old. And some of the reason for that was I was looking for a spiritual path that was not the tradition that I grew up in. I was born into the Jewish tradition, but very early on in my youth, I knew that I was gay, and I decided early on I could see that all organized religion was not going to be accepting of my path of loving others. And for me, my path of loving others and loving men, or finding a loving man, is part of my spiritual path. I don't see sexuality and spirituality as separate. So I went off in search of other paths from organized religion that would be more welcoming of who I was, and really was open to the fullness of who I was, so that I could stand before the divine in the full honesty of who I am. And so I started studying tarot, and I started studying lots of paths. I spent many years in Buddhism, learning Buddhist meditation, and I'd just gone to other, I chanted with the Guru Maharaji cultists at one point. I'd studied the teachings of Baba Ram Das, but it was Buddhism that really spoke to me. And as I deepened my Buddhist practice, one day I found, when I was on a meditation retreat, that I came up against something that I can only describe as the root of my soul. And it was a shocking experience to me, because it felt like I was profoundly Jewish, and that really the root of who I am needed to be explored in a new way with an understanding that I'd gotten from Buddhism. So I went to some friends who had really studied deeply in Judaism, and I said, can you point me to any kind of analogous teaching? And they took down some Jewish prayer books, and I read some of the prayers, which I learned as a child, except I discovered now that I was reading them with the education of meditation, was that I was actually reading meditation instructions. It's just that no rabbis I'd ever studied with when I was learning to be a bar mitzvah ever taught that, and none of the rabbis I ever worked with even seemed to know that. But my friend said, well, it's a different time now, and we bet you can go find a rabbi who knows all of these things and who can teach you this. And the interesting thing is, when I was first learning tarot, I knew that there was a connection to Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, but I put it aside because that's not the part of it I wanted to study. But as I began to get very deep into Jewish mysticism and into my studies with Kabbalah teachers, both rabbis and academics and practical teachers, I realized that it was time to sort of bring that understanding back to the tarot. And the really amazing thing was that I learned this traditional Kabbalistic practice called counting the Omer. And what this practice does is it teaches you to bring these, I mentioned the Sephirot earlier, these building blocks of creation. And the idea is that every day, over the course of 49 days, you work with two of these Sephirot as a way of purifying your soul in preparation for your own personal revelation. And when I realized that, in fact, the tarot deck and the cards corresponded to the Sephirot, which always felt rather abstract to me, even as I was studying, as an adult. The Tree of Life and the Sephirot felt very distant, and they didn't feel very much part of my everyday lived reality. But when I connected them to the cards and looked at the images on the cards, I said, oh, of course, the Sephirot connect in these kinds of situations. So when you start to work with the cards, all of a sudden, the lived meaning of the Sephirot come into view. And that way, I was able to do this practice in a completely new way. And I started writing about it online in a blog since I decided I would count the Omer online as a way of committing myself to do it for the 49-day course. And while I was doing it, some people wrote to me and said, this is really interesting. Can you teach us how to do it? At the time, this was the early 2000s, I was figuring it out myself, but I realized that people were interested in this. And so over the years, I would do this practice every year because it is an annual practice. I would do it a little bit differently and study it a little bit differently until I felt like I had it really down. So that I could write it in a way that people could grasp it in a way that is simple, that could be used in their everyday lives as a kind of a spiritual gym, a 49-day workout, if you will, that can help clear psycho-spiritual blockages that enable us, that once they're clear, to have a fuller relationship with the divine.
That is so fascinating. Let's dig a little deeper. So this counting happens over the course of 49 days. So on the 50th day, you're done. So what in practical terms does that look like? What, for example, is day 1? What is day 15? How does this path evolve?
Let me back up and then I'll get to day 1.
Okay.
So this mythologically or biblically, depending on how you look at it, the path starts on the second day of Passover. And the reason is that this is when the ancient Israelites were leaving slavery and leaving Egypt. And over the course of the next 49 days, they travel through the desert until they come to, on the 50th day, to the foot of Mount Sinai, where all of the people receive the revelation of the Torah. And so this practice is, in fact, a kind of a psycho-spiritual re-experiencing on the personal inner level, this journey away from inner slavery to inner freedom and a relationship with the divine. So that the very first day, you're working with the Sephirot that you work with on the first week and the first day, which is Chesed, and which is a kind of a loving kindness and an experience of divine love without boundaries. And this is very much the experience of the first day, because you're walking away from freedom. You're walking away from slavery. You're feeling free for the first time. And you've taken on this path to walk for becoming a spiritually responsible adult. It releases lots of energy of love, so that the very first day has all of that energy around it. But each day, you're working with 2 different Sephirot as you pass through these different trials. And each one, as you combine them, shines a light on a different part of your character, so that you can look at yourself and reflect and see ways in which these energies express themselves in your life. Now, as an example, since you want a concrete example, and it's really important that you have that, since people really need to know how that works. So let's look at the day that is Netzach within Chesed. Netzach is one of the Sephirot, and it is often translated as a victory, but it represents a lot of things. It represents ambition, the establishment of one's ego, perseverance and persistence, the desire to dominate, so that each of these Sephirot have both positive and negative qualities. And so on the day that you're looking at the relationship between Netzach and Chesed, a number of questions can arise. You know, I find myself, every year I do this, the pairing of the Sephirot lead me to ask different questions based on where I am on my path. But among the questions I'm asked when I've worked with Netzach and Chesed is, okay, Netzach is about ego and sometimes about domination, and Chesed is about love, and sometimes it can be love that overwhelms. So the question I've had to ask myself, in what way have I expressed my love in ways that have actually dominated my partner rather than opened a space for him. So that my love is not really an expression of relationship, and it's an expression of domination. Or there have been times when, because Netzach is also about persistence and the ability to persevere, I've looked at, okay, there are times when my love has felt weak or troubled. And I've been in a relationship where there have been rocky times. So the question is, am I able to use my inner Netzach, my inner persistence, and my desire to see things through, to persevere through these rocky times as a way of helping my love continue and to grow? So there are lots of ways to go.
And so to underscore, somebody who is looking for the winning lottery numbers. Or, you laugh, I know. Well, a lot of times that's what people...
Well, if somebody finds it, please call me.
You got it. Well, I think sometimes, too, when people think about seeing into the future or finding some kind of inner truth, when you can find this kind of a personal journey, it transcends that superficial, I want to know if my true love loves me or he loves me not, or I want to find the winning lottery numbers. It just seems like it is so much more than that.
Well, it's true. This is not using the cards for divination. It's using them for contemplation and meditation as a way of reflecting on one's spiritual qualities and as a way of growing. Now, when you do this and you're able to clear any kinds of blockages of these spiritual energies within you, because you're a clearer channel for the divine to move through you, sometimes you will actually experience an understanding of what is about to happen. You can see ahead a little. It's not about finding out what's happening in the future, but because you are a clearer channel for divine energy, you have a clearer picture of everything that's going on around you, so that it's easier for you to make better decisions that are actions rather than reactions.
And this book is essentially a guide to doing this. Does somebody need to start it on a specific date? Does it need to start on Passover or...
Traditionally, this is when Jews do it, and it's also part of the Christian tradition. It's not very well known, but if you read the book of Acts, for example, in Acts chapter 2, this is when, after the crucifixion, the apostles are gathered in a room together with Mary and Jesus' brothers, and it is 50 days after the crucifixion. It is Pentecost, which simply means 50 days. And that is, after Passover, 50 days later is Pentecost. And all of these, the apostles, they were all Jews, and they were gathered for the Pentecost evening vigil. And part of the evening vigil is the desire to have your own revelation. What happened for the apostles is that tongues of, the Spirit, the divine Spirit, entered the room, and tongues of flame appeared over each of them, so that they were all able to speak a language that they did not know. And then after that, they all went into the streets and proselytized, told the story of Jesus' life to other people who were in the streets who'd come to Jerusalem for the Pentecost holiday. And they were coming from all over the Roman Empire, so they spoke all different languages. But now the apostles, who were not able previously to speak these languages, were speaking in tongues, as they say, but they were speaking these other languages and sharing the gospel. So that just as Jews received revelation at Mount Sinai on the 50th day on Pentecost, these early Christians who were Jews received their revelation on Pentecost. And there are all kinds of practices over the course of time known as Eastertide, which are also about clearing this up. But you do not have to do this between Passover and Pentecost, or between Easter and Pentecost. You can choose any 49-day period you wish. The good thing about doing it on the time that everybody else is doing it is that you are entering a kind of a morphic field, an energetic field that is created by everyone who's doing it together. So you get an extra zhuzh of spiritual energy while you're doing it. But it's not required. I have done this, in fact, at other times of the year when I felt that I needed to sort of clear things in myself.
And let's talk a little bit about what reviewers, people who have read the book and experienced this, what do they have to say? What kind of feedback have you received?
It's interesting. I got an email just the other day from a woman who had started the process in late January. And this was a couple of weeks ago. She was somewhere in the 20s. I don't remember which day it was exactly. But she said she had a little epiphany that affected a relationship that she had been troubled about, that, she had been unable to stand up for herself. She didn't want to confront this person in a way that would end the relationship, but she felt that she was being walked over. And she wanted to learn how to better really be herself and keep her boundaries, but also stay in relationship. And as she was doing this work, she saw how things that she did that almost invited the way this relationship was working, and it gave her clues as to how to change it. So she tried some of these things out, and it transformed that relationship for her in a way that really astounded her, which is why she sent me this email. She said, I'm only, 20 some odd days in, and this has already changed one important relationship in my life. I'm very grateful. So, and that, I can't tell you how much that meant to me, because I know how much this path and doing this work has helped me and has changed my life. But and the reason I wrote the book was to share the teachings with others so that they might experience the benefits of this path as well. And to hear from people that it's working for them is really very gratifying.
Oh, I bet it is. Tell us where people can find you online, find the book, your website. Yeah, give us all of that.
My book, the book is Tarot and the Gates of Light. My website is gatesoflighttarot.com. And, from there, you can, there's a link to buy the book. You can buy it on the publisher's website at Inner Traditions. Of course, you can buy it at that mega beast Amazon. Although I'd certainly prefer you to support your independent bookstores, particularly if there are local New Age bookstores that are struggling. Go buy it there.
That's a great point. And remember, you can always walk into a bookstore or even a library and ask them to get that. Yes,
definitely.
Always, yeah. And then that
and
way
actually,
too.
There was a review just the other day from the Midwest Review of Books, and it was a review site for libraries and institutions. And the publisher sent me the review, and I was so thrilled because they basically said, we unreservedly recommend this book. And because they saw how it worked for all different kinds of people, and how even if you don't know very much about tarot, even if you don't know anything about Kabbalah, it really explains the concepts in a very simple way so that in a very short time you're able to work with them.
And that's high praise. I know the folks over at Midwest Book Reviews, so congratulations on that. That's fabulous.
Thank you.
Yes. And again, if you get the book from your library, then after you're finished with it, just think of all the people after you who will be able to enjoy it too. So that's a great way to just kind of spread it around a little bit. Mark, thank you so much. I enjoyed talking with you today. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And once again, this is Mark Horne, and his book is Tarot and the Gates of Light. Highly recommend it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today on the Books That Make You show. Again, my name is Desiree Duffy, and if you would like to find out more, well, you can come to our website. That's booksthatmakeyou.com. And you can also follow on Facebook, and we're on Instagram. And you can sign up for our newsletter, too. We're always doing bookish fun things. We have contests and author interviews and book reviews and so much more. Until next time, all of my bookish buddies, please enjoy all of the books that make you exactly who you are.
The executive producer for Books That Make You is Desiree Duffy. Produced and sound mastered by Phil Giangrande. Engineering by Dave Nabox. Social media and promotion by Bree Sweeter. For more, visit booksthatmakeyou.com.